In nonprofit program evaluation, a logic model is akin to a roadmap of what your organization has to offer and how it gets to the outcomes from the initial inputs. If the logic model is considered a roadmap, then the client path flowchart should be considered navigation or routes, possible routes within that map. So that's why a logic model and a client path flowchart tend usually to go hand in hand. The logic model is the map, and the client path flowchart are the different possible routes from point A to point B. So let's first talk about the logic model. In the logic model, here you have an example. So the inputs are the actual things that you're bringing together to deliver on whatever services that you are aiming to deliver on. So here we have an example logic model for GED program for high school dropouts. So the inputs here are free articles and other publications on the web. You've got the funders, you've got self-directed learners, volunteers, computers, the internet, and supplies. These are all the material things and people that you need to come together in order for everything else to happen. These are the building blocks. So when you think of inputs, you want to think of the building blocks to a particular organization. Now, you can really get carried away with the inputs column because anything can be an input. In fact, oxygen can be an input. Air conditioning can be an input. Electricity can be an input because without those things, you're not going to have an organization. But specifically in the input section, you want to use your discretion and professionalism in highlighting the specific inputs, the specific building blocks that are important in you developing your own organization, right? So once you have the inputs here, for this particular example, we're using the GED program for high school dropouts. The inputs are the funders, the self-directed learners, the volunteers, the computers, the internet, supplies, free articles, and other publications on the web. So those are the inputs. Next, we have the activities. The activities are what are you trying to do with the inputs? All right, so you have the building blocks. How are you going to be putting the building blocks together? That's what the activities are. Here we see provide peer assistance in which learners support each other. So you see you're taking the inputs and you're putting them into activities. Next, we have provide free online training program for basic high school modules. See, again, you're taking the inputs, the building blocks, and you're turning them into activities. You're also providing free online training program for basic life skills and provide free online training program to pass the GED exam. Again, you're with the activities column, you're just taking the inputs, the building blocks, and you're putting them together. These are some of the activities here, right? Now, from the activities to get to the outputs column, what you're doing is you're taking the activities. Now you're taking the building blocks. You've formed activities as far as what you're doing with the building blocks. Now you're measuring the activities. You see, all of the outputs start with a number. In fact, all outputs will start with a number. What are you aiming to accomplish with the activities? How many, how often, how many completed, right? So with outputs, you see each starts with a number. So first we have 30 groups that use peer models. See, it's an output based on the activities. If we have peer assistance learning, we want in the output, we want to have 30 groups that use peer models. Next, we have 100 completed training programs. Okay, so here are the activities, and what are the numbers associated with those activities? Here, 100 completed training programs. Next, we have 900 learners who finished basics of self-directed learning. Okay, so again, we're taking the activities and we're putting a number on it, an estimate or a projection, if you will. 900 learners who finished basic life skills, 900 learners who passed their GED to gain high school diploma. See, outputs are very measurable, very measurable. And for all intents and purposes, organizations tend often to measure their outputs and then determine whether or not they are doing best practice, outcome-driven, evidence-based practice, right? Outcomes, which is different from outputs, outcomes tend often to be more theoretical sometimes, not often, sometimes tend to be theoretical. But the key difference between an output and an outcome is that the output is generally controlled by the organization. So I can have 30 groups that use peer models. I can have 100 completed training programs. I can have 900 learners who finished self-directed learning, who finished basic life skills, who finished and got their GED diploma, although that is not fully under my control because it is an external assessment. But I can essentially create an environment where I can say, well, my organization has been successful because we've met these. Like if I hit 29 out of 30, I haven't been successful. 99 out of 100, haven't been successful. 899 out of 900, I have not been successful. So outputs are more measurable, whereas outcomes are some of the things that I want to see happen after the client, or in this case the high school dropouts, leave my program. What do I want to see? Short term, you can think of as between 0 to 5 years sometimes, just as a rule of thumb. Intermediate outcomes tend often to be between 5 to 20 years, and long-term outcomes are outcomes that are 20 plus years. Now, depending on the organization, it can be different. Short-term outcomes could be measured in a matter of days or weeks. Intermediate outcomes could be measured in a matter of weeks to months. And long-term outcomes could be measured in a matter of months to years. So it really depends on the organization. So even though I said it's a rule of thumb, you've got 8 other fingers besides your thumb. So there are plenty of exceptions to that particular concept. So here for the high school dropouts, short-term outcomes we have listed as high school diploma for graduates, increased interest to attend advanced schooling, increased confidence that learner can manage formal learning programs. So these are outcomes that my organization and myself included, we hope that we can achieve, but we can't necessarily control. We can't control confidence, right? We can't control interest. So these are things that we want to have an influence on. So with the outputs going into short-term outcomes, these are the measurables, and this is what we want philosophically to happen moving forward. Intermediate outcomes, in this example, again, I'm just thinking of it as a 5 to 20 year plan. So full-time employment for learners in jobs that require high school education, independent living for learners from using salary to rent housing, strong basic life skills for learners. So this is not necessarily long-term, not necessarily short-term, but something that you hope that clients that have graduated from your program will continue working on over the next several years. So these are the intermediate outcomes, philosophical and not necessarily under the organization's control. Again, this is sort of like you're pushing the domino in the output section, and you're hoping that the dominoes continue to fall moving forward. The short-term dominoes, the short-term dominoes, hit the intermediate dominoes, and then the intermediate dominoes hit the long-term dominoes, and hopefully everything goes according to plan. And of course, here we have the long-term philosophical outcomes listed here for high school dropouts, improved attitude towards self and society for graduates, improved family life for families and graduates, increased reliability and improved judgment of learners. So here we see more of a 20-plus year plan. You might even see home ownership instead of rent. So you can have more here in all of these columns. This is a shortened version, of course, just for demonstration purposes. But this is how you go from the inputs, the building blocks, right, all the way to long-term outcomes, the philosophical impact you want to have on the community and the population as a whole. So that's what a logic model is for. It's just the roadmap of what your organization will begin with and what your organization eventually wants to accomplish, the greater good, if you will. So again, if this is the roadmap, then the client path flowchart is the navigation of the routes, the possible routes that are available, right? So in this example, we're using something a little bit different. So instead of the high school dropouts, we're using adolescents in home or foster care. So you see, once the adolescent is in the home, they're going from that to the next step in the flow chart, which is the crisis happening, right? And then after the crisis happens, the next step in the process, in the flow, if you will be the assessment by a referring source. And then once the assessment is done, you see this is a diamond instead of a square. So all of the squares, as you can see, are processes. All of the diamonds are decisions, and this rounded rectangle is a termination, right? So anything that's a process is a one-directional event. See, you go from being an adolescent in a home or foster care, one direction, you have a crisis, unfortunately. And then in one direction, after you have the crisis, you have an assessment by a referring source. And then in that direction, you go to a referral to an AP. Referral to AP. So in a diamond, you have a decision to make. That's why it says decision, right? So the decision here would be either yes or no. Do you want to refer to AP, or do you not want to refer to AP? Let's say you don't, just for simplicity's sake, right? So referral to AP, question mark? The answer is no. So then, do you want to refer to other program available for client? It's either a yes, in which case they'll go to a different program. And if it's no, then you terminate. They just, that's it. That's the last of the business that you'll do with that particular client. Understand that all roads, right? All roads must lead to termination. You don't want to just create a circular event where you have a client that's stuck in the client path flowchart and they never get to termination because they just be with your organization for eternity, really. So all paths must eventually lead to termination. Now, let's say the question of referring to AP is a yes. Then you can complete an assessment and intervention by an AP worker. And then once the assessment is completed, which is a process, another decision point is here, right? So crisis is resolved and AP is appropriate. So if that is not the case, you go back and repeat the process. Another assessment, another decision as to whether or not to refer, another decision here, and then another process. So you might have circular process here, but again, eventually, after this circular process is complete, you're going to have a progression, right? And from this decision point, let's say the progression is crisis is resolved and AP is appropriate. If the answer then is yes instead of no, then you move on to the next process, which is the contract service with referring source. And then after that process, you've got another decision to make, client engaged by AP. Now, if that's not the case, you go back, you start the process over again. Not every relationship, not every professional relationship will be effective nor and efficient. So you might have to repeat this process a couple times before you find a good fit for your client. I think this makes a lot of sense for those people who are already in practice, right? So once that is completed, let's say, you've repeated the process several times over, and then the answer to client engaged by AP is yes. You move around. Okay, so it's yes. And then you have another part of the process, client contract with AP worker, process, treatment by AP, another process moving forward, reassessment by AP, another process. These are things that are happening. And now we have another, in this example, the final decision point. Do we continue treatment? If the answer is yes, then we go back to treatment and reassess. Continue treatment? Yes. All right. Go back to treatment with AP by AP, and then reassess for continued treatment. And eventually, hopefully, your client moves forward in such a direction, progresses in such a direction that the relationship need no longer be there, and then you move into termination. You see, no matter what direction I go here, the more I travel through it, build your own adventure type, the more I travel through it, eventually I will always end at termination, right? And that's the key to any client path flowchart, is that you have processes in these boxes, you have several decision points, but all processes and decision points at the end must lead eventually to termination. All right, and that's the key to completing a client path flowchart.